Nikita studied at the University of Mumbai, did her PhD in Germany, taught in various countries, and now she is a professor of political science and gender studies at the University of Gießen, Germany. Her work centers around transnational approaches to justice and democracy, and Nikita uses post-colonial and queer theory to challenge established concepts. As she received the Käthe Leichter Award in 2017 for outstanding achievements in support of gender studies and the women's movement, we are very happy that she is a member or a very active participant of this festival. I will see you again after Nikita has finished. Dear Nikita, the digital floor is yours.
Thank you, Prasanna, for the kind introduction. And I'd like to begin by congratulating the organizers for putting together this super exciting festival. And despite the challenging situation, bringing together such a fantastic mix of scholars, activists, artists, and the audiences together. We'll all go away with inspiring ideas and stimulating questions. Now, a number of important and unresolvable issues were raised in the past 3 days. And in my short contemplations, I'd like to touch upon 3 points. So point number 1, transnational justice and impossible solidarities, and the im is in bracket. Now, in her powerful talk, How Does Change Happen?, Angela Davis shares experiences with racism that were formative in her political and intellectual endeavors. At a time when there were separate drinking fountains and restrooms for non-whites, Angela Davis's mother told her, and I quote, "This is not the way things are supposed to be, and they will not always be this way," end of quote. It was an instructive lesson for Angela Davis of not accepting what is simply because it is so. One of the biggest challenges for those of us who seek to transform unjust social, political, and economic relations is to undo the discontinuity between theory and practice. Invariably, one tends to prioritize one at the cost of the other, with the risk of either producing theory that is detached and depoliticized with little relevance to the everyday lives of the disenfranchised and dispossessed, or on the other hand, reifying experience where self-reflection and self-critique is sacrificed in the face of urgency of immediate action. Protest politics against centuries-old dehumanizing and discriminatory practices of racism, anti-Semitism, sexism, heterosexism gives us hope that change is indeed possible, what we are experiencing even as I speak. Yet, we must be vigilant about the non-performativity of our politics. Sarah Ahmed, for example, diagnoses a non-performativity of diversity politics, an issue that has been brought up again and again in the last couple of days. The importance of diversity politics, but also the challenges of diversity politics. And Sarah Ahmed tells us that although the discourses and guidelines surrounding progressive politics like diversity are not completely ineffective, nonetheless, they do not always necessarily lead to the effects they name and promise, but are at the same time nonetheless perceived as performative, which means that they generate power effects in that the rhetoric prevents combating that which it pretends to abolish. So there is a negative relationship between rhetoric and reality, between claim, what we want, our intention, and practice. So, we are right now experiencing a resistance to power. People are speaking truth to power. But we have to also remember that where there is resistance, there is also power. And that the practice of critique, that the practice of protest can inadvertently, unintentionally stabilize hegemonic relations, even as we hope and aspire to disrupt them. And that protest politics and public assemblies can also contribute to processes of subalternization instead of revolutionizing social, political, and economic relations. So I would implore everybody, my friends who are out there listening, that even as we struggle, we should constantly reflect on the limits of our action and persistently confront the question, who is not being listened to? Because they do not have access to platforms from which they can be heard, whose pain mobilizes transnational solidarity, whereas one is indifferent to other experiences of suffering and distress. The Marxist philosopher Terry Eagleton once said, ideology is like bad breath. It's always the others who have it. So we need to persistently question one's own perceptions and presumptions, even as we struggle for a better and more just world. We must again and again revisit the question that Spivak put so powerfully: can the subaltern speak? And we must be vigilant not to self subalternize. Every time I speak, someone else is silent. And when I'm heard, someone else is not listened to. We need to pay attention to practices of silencing that happen every time we speak. This brings me to my second point, which is on digital virtual counterpublics and democracy. Now, there is a promise, and this festival is a very good example of accessibility, the openness, and the inclusionary character of digital counterpublics. That they are democratic, that everyone has a voice, irrespective of status or qualification. In the last couple of days, the issue of language barrier was again and again addressed. And here I'd just like to remind all of us of a very fundamental, old fashioned feminist critique, and that is the question of time. So, the question of access to counterpublics and question of political participation also needs to take seriously who has the time to participate in these kinds of events. If you have to work for 16 hours a day, if you have to take care of elderly, if you have to take care of children, if you have to have other kinds of responsibilities, domestic and also other kinds of responsibilities, then your access to political participation is not the same as other privileged subjects. So we need to take seriously the discontinuity between those who have access to intellectual labor and those who don't. And here we need to pay attention again and again to international division of labor. This brings me to the third very important point, and that is the relationship between civil society and the state. Now, very often, radical politics is coded as anti state, where there is a very easy division between good politics and bad state, or the good civil society and the evil state. And I think there is a tendency to, in a certain way, demonize the state as what Nietzsche calls, the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche calls monstre frua, the coldest of all cold monsters. And even as it is extremely important and imperative that we critique the state, which is one of the most important aspects of democracy, that we need to hold the state accountable, we must also be careful of not demonizing the state. I mean, just to give the most obvious example, this festival, the Goethe-Institut itself, is enabled through state funding on a very personal level. I, for example, am not a German citizen, but I am a German civil servant. So, to a certain extent, even my agency is enabled by the German state. And this is what Gayatri Spivak, I think, means when she talks about agency in complicity. And here she doesn't mean complicity necessarily in a negative manner, but rather shows that how every exercise of agency takes place within certain frameworks and within certain structures that are anchored in larger capitalist, patriarchal, imperialist structures. So none of us has an uncontaminated agency in that way. And that each of us is, to a certain extent, part of the problem and not just the solution. So I would like to point out that even as we need to take the critique of state seriously, we need to be very cautious of not falling into the trap of what Michel Foucault called state phobia, which means that we need to reimagine our relationship to the state and its coercive power. So I'm not in any way romanticizing or idealizing the state. I mean, I'm speaking from a German context, and we've seen what happened in Germany when the state, which has a monopoly on violence, when it became totalitarian and fascist. So there is in no way any question of relativizing state violence, and yet we need to reimagine our relationship to the state. So for me, the central question when we talk about radical politics, when we are talking about processes of decolonization, is to have a simultaneous multi-directional focus on a micro level, but also on the macro level on structures. And here the question is, can the state be made to serve the interests of its most vulnerable citizens instead of its most powerful? And if yes, how? This brings me to the last 2 points that I want to make. The first is kind of almost anecdotal experience that I had, and this is for my colleagues at the Goethe-Institut. So last year I was invited to a Marxist feminist conference in Mexico, and then I was at a feminist festival in Cairo. And in both these cities, from very, very different people whom I met, scholars, activists, but also everyday students. I mean, in everyday context, my interactions with students, I heard very, very positive things about the Goethe-Institut and about Germany as such. And I said jokingly to some of my colleagues when I came back that for somebody like me who's made a career out of critiquing the Germans and critiquing the German state, it was a bit, as one says in German, as irritierend. It was a bit irritating, although in German one it has a positive connotation, to hear such praises about Germany. So when I was at the Goethe-Institut and talking to colleagues, I told them that you'll have to be careful because now, from what I hear, the expectations are very, very high, and you all have a reputation to maintain. Yeah, so the Leistungsdruck, and now after having organized such a successful and such a brilliant festival, I think the Leistungsdruck, the performance anxiety, is even higher. So congratulations to my colleagues at the Goethe-Institut, but at the same time, I have to say, be cautious. You have a reputation to lose, so you'll have to even work harder. And last but not least, I'd like to return to a question that Prasanna asked in the opening plenary, which I thought was such an important and such a thought-provoking question. And it's something that I've been struggling with for the last few years, and I haven't found a very, I would say, satisfying answer. But as Beckett says, ever tried, ever failed, try again, fail better. So in that spirit, I would say, I would again attempt to answer the question, what is to be done? And here I'd like to draw on Gayatri Spivak, who gives this very powerful and very instructive metaphor of doing politics is akin, it's like brushing your teeth. So all of us got up in the morning today and we brushed our teeth. And in a certain way, brushing one's teeth is one of the most futile exercises, because when you get up in the morning and brush your teeth, there is no guarantee that you will survive the day. I know I'm speaking to a lot of very young people and I should not be talking about mortality, but given the circumstances we are living in, whether it's COVID or other kinds of crises and catastrophes that are happening, I think it is also important to talk about our existential crises also. So just as we brush our teeth every day in the morning, although there is no guarantee that we'll survive the day, in the same way, doing politics is a working without guarantees. So just like dental hygiene is a critique of mortality, politics, even though it's done with best of intentions, does not always translate into good consequences. So on that note, my last sentence here would be that I wish all of us a lot of energy, a lot of power for our struggles. And at the same time, even if we fail, take heart, because then we need to try again and fail better. Wishing all of y'all all the best. Take care. And thanks again for your attention.
Dear participants of this huge and intense festival, we have come a good deal closer to our goal of working with you to find new ways of dealing with the colonial past. There is no elephant in the room, but an undeniable fact. Only if this past becomes a non-negotiable part of our collective memory, we will be able to change the structural exclusions and the inequalities. And this may be a way to secure the sustainability of the findings that we want. We would like to share with you the intensity of the last days. Let us look at the opportunities we may have gained because we have not come together as festival tourists. Although we missed personal contacts to each other, we were focused and not distracted. We continued getting together again and again, and we really worked hard. Let us use this spirit and carry it into the networks in which it multiplies. Maybe we have achieved even more than in pre-pandemic times. Who knows? It is impossible to go into all the inputs, discussions, and contributions we have seen in the last few days. 32 events in the main program only, which was amazing. So please allow me to summarize briefly the issues that have recurred in the different contexts during the last days. First, we must continue to diminish barriers economically, politically, and language-wise. Second, we have to change things, not only the surface, but also the structures in the background. This applies both to culture, who is on stage, who is behind it, as well as for global relations. The panel Alternative Possibilities Towards Self-Reliance, for example, looked at power structures and asked, what makes the powerful powerful? What makes the weak weak? Culture was described as a possible engine for transformation, and this was underlined by many artistic contributions during the festival in various ways. Third, without the inclusion of communities in the discussion, we will not get anywhere. This was also one of the most important points in the panel, restitution. We need a community-driven restitution. We need to cooperate and collaborate with NGOs. This must become a basis for our global work. And finally, it is absolutely necessary that the West learns to give up its self-declared claim to inhabit the interpretive authority, die Deutungshoheit. We do not know what the future will bring. But what is certain is that without the visibility and empowerment of many different voices, there will be no hope of overcoming the colonial past. Nikita Dhawan, for example, spoke at the beginning of the festival about a new ethic of listening. And at the end of this festival, of course, we must also ask the question, how do we proceed? I am sure we haven't found any definite answers, but we have received many new impulses and we have started talking to each other. The Goethe-Institut will continue to offer opportunities in the future to continue the discussions that have begun and to connect people from different areas and places around the world. The General Secretary of the Goethe-Institut, Johannes Ebert, sends you the following words of farewell. I quote, especially when we now look around the world and see how pressing the issue of racism is, I believe even more that this kind of cultural exchange in which different voices and perspectives are made visible is an important social task for the future. We stand for this attitude with our work at home and abroad, unquote. The development of new digital formats will also be continued at the Goethe-Institut, because we can definitely say that the experiment of this festival has been a success. You can also see that from many contributions that will be made available online in the media library soon. And now the moment of thanks has come, which can never be satisfactory because we can never mention everybody. So I will try to give you facts and figures. On behalf of the Goethe-Institut, we would like to start by thanking the 72 artists and experts from 29 countries in the main program and the fantastic 100 contributors in the radio program. I simply have to list the participating countries. It is impressive. Angola, Australia, Bahrain, Belgium, Brazil, Canada, China, Democratic Republic of Congo, Egypt, France, Germany, Guatemala, India, Israel, Italy, Jordan, Kenya, Mozambique, Namibia, Nigeria, Portugal, Rwanda, Senegal, South Africa, Tanzania, Togo, United Kingdom, and the USA. We would also like to thank the Goethe-Institut team. They worked constantly. The technical team, same. The social media team that kept the debate with the audience alive. the translators who mediated between English, French, Portuguese, and German, the teams of the participating Goethe-Institutes worldwide, and in general, to all the numerous participants who made this festival possible. Tomorrow, the radio program Latitude on Air will be available at Reboot FM for the whole day, and the accompanying film program of the Arsenal Institute for Film and Video Art will be online until June 12th. Both links can be found on the website. But before the festival actually completely ends, there's one more musical highlight to come. At 8 p.m. Central European Time, we will be showing a short film by singer Rachel Nyangombe. Immediately afterwards, at 8 o'clock, she will play a concert with her band. The songs of Nyangombe play with Lingala, French, and English, and reflect wonderfully the topics we have been dealing with in the last days. So now I have to say goodbye with a heavy heart after 3 days that will echo for a long time. I very much hope that we will meet in person somewhere at some point. Until then, stay safe, healthy, and take care. See you again, and goodbye.